Switch gears now and open up a panel about the sandwich generation. And I will invite both Julia Cohen-Sebastian, the co-founder and CEO of Grace, as well as Heather Ainsworth, the CEO of Workable Concept, to join me in here. And we are the three of us going to move through this conversation together. So thank you both for being here today.
Thank you for
Thanks
having us.
Sure thing. So we're going to tackle as a group what I will call a little bit the elephant in the room, although Patrice teed this up with her comments a couple minutes ago about acknowledging that we have caregivers in the space who are focused on young families, who are now also focused potentially on an aging parent or relative. And if I could just quickly share a little anecdote about why this is so near and dear to my heart, is that I started apparently in 2019 and decided to really go all in on a business that could support working parents. And then almost within that same week, my spouse moved out and I found myself single parenting. And the only way I got through 2019 was with help from my parents, who were healthy and strong and brought lots of assistance to the family, to the kids, to me. And then we rounded the corner into 2020. And with COVID, and we'll explore this, you can't just line up a grandparent to hang out with a grandchild anymore, as we face the danger of a pandemic where our older population is at risk. And so a new layer and level of worry came into what I was already trying to juggle and balance. And these are with parents who are still, for the most part, healthy and strong. So I know you've also got people facing caring for one or more family members with not even that same benefit, and the layer of concern. So I want to take a minute now and have each of you share a little bit about your work and how you got into this space, and then we'll jump into the deeper topic from here.
Sounds good. So I'm Heather Ainsworth. I founded Workable Concept as a consultancy after about 20 years of working on issues of gender equity in the workplace and running and building very large caregiving businesses nationally of all different types. So my work now is to actually consult with employers about figuring out what's the best fit approach for supporting all the caregivers that they have and will have among their workforce, because people come in with assumptions about what those solutions need to be and then say, my culture can't do that, my investors or my CEO won't let me do that, I can't afford that. But the reality is that when you really just get in, you can look and create a phased plan that every single employer can afford and needs to put better supports in place to support not just the sandwich generation, but those who are starting out with kids and may layer into the sandwich generation, and those who are starting out taking care of their parents and then layering their own kids. So I consult with employers, and I also do career coaching primarily around issues of how people can work with their partner to use everything at home, in their community, and in both of their workplaces to create a plan so both partners can sort of thrive at work and home. In the midst of it, I'm an advisor for AARP's family caregiving team and sort of lead their national outreach to engage employers and raise awareness on these issues, which is work I really love, because they're not selling anything. It's just, let's educate people.
And that's such a key point you made, that this is individual level work and it's employer level work. So it's twofold, and we'll try to keep that in mind as we move through the rest of our conversation. Julia, how about you?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I am the co-founder and CEO of Grace, and we are a navigation solution for family caregivers. So we really mostly focus on those caring for adults and elders, all of those besides young children. And, I really actually came to this from a background in healthcare as an executive in a number of different healthcare organizations, where I just kept finding, both personally and professionally, that there was no focus on the caregiver as a key stakeholder, and that a lot of organizations were struggling enough on how to better engage their patients or their health plan members or their employees without really thinking about, the caregivers are one of the most valuable stakeholders in influencing the care of loved ones out there, and that we ought to start treating them as such. And also that their families are carrying a disproportionate burden. So as the healthcare system is becoming a lot more complex, a lot more expensive, with a lot more challenges, with different demographics, an enormous demographic shift in America, that we really were not equipping families with the resources that they needed to be successful for their own family units, for the healthcare industry, and frankly, for our entire economy at large. So that was a lot of the motivation and the inspiration behind our starting with Grace.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you. I'm glad we get to hear from both of you. And I want to start with really defining the sandwich generation, if we could. So Heather, I'll start with you, because you already mentioned this is something that people flow in and out of in terms of their own life stage and their own generations and their families. So how do you think about it and define it?
I think about it as I mentioned, most of us either are caregivers or just finished being caregivers or about to become caregivers. And there's a beautiful quote from Rosalind Carter to that effect. If any of you don't know it, look it up. It's something you're going to want to post and share. With the sandwich generation, I think we tend to think, frankly, of somebody like me, and I am a member of the sandwich generation, which certainly informed my decision to step back from sort of having a boss and being a boss of lots of people to say, I have 2 teenagers and 3 parents essentially living on the other coast. So this work is part of my effort to thrive as a member of the sandwich generation. And it is true that that kind of like late 40s, mom and daughter or daughter-in-law is a large portion of who family caregiver or sandwich generation folks are. But the reality is we really have to challenge our assumptions. 20% of members of the sandwich generation are under age 40. 40%, some say 50, depends where you get the data, are men. And in terms of caring for aging relatives, men actually tend to do the same kind of care load, number of hours per week outside their paid work, as women do. So when we push our assumptions, understand they're younger than we think, they're not all women, and importantly, particularly in our workplaces, to understand and address the fact that the Latinx community is much more likely to be a member of the sandwich generation for a variety of reasons. It starts to point employers towards how sandwich generation support connects to their DEI goals and other goals. So that's how I think about it, out of the box.
Julia, what about you? How do you define it?
Well, I think Heather said it well in a lot of regards. I think, the sandwich generation, of course, implies that people have children that they're still caring for. There are also a lot who don't have kids. So, at large, there are 48 million people in America who are caring for someone over the age of 18. And that's a growth of nearly 10 million people in the last 5 years alone. Okay. And we're going to have more seniors than children in America in the next decade. So, the population of kids is actually rapidly declining for a number of really sad reasons right now. But what that means is people who didn't think they were part of the sandwich generation, and actually people who don't identify as being caregivers, this is a big trap for employers, is trying to survey and ask people whether they think they're caregivers. And I've had so many conversations with people who are part of the sandwich generation who will give extended stories about moving parents in with them. And then they're like, but I'm not a caregiver. That's who I hire, right? So they think of themselves as helping. So, I think a lot of things about the sandwich generation are hard to pin down, where caregiving for an adult is hard to pin down because it comes in so many different shapes and sizes. And we routinely come to this conversation with expectations about what that should look like based on our own experiences. But as a prior panelist had spoken to, this comes in so many shapes and sizes that we really can't assume what this looks like for someone else.
Just to follow up on that, why do you think people don't see themselves in a caregiver role? I mean, what is that about, that dynamic of I'm helping and I'm hiring care? What drives that, do you think?
So sometimes I think that has to do with the stage of decline of a loved one. So, for example, if you're not actively providing intensive medical care, which is a very rapidly growing trend, that people are providing more intensive medical care at home. But if you don't think you're already doing that for a parent or a loved one, you may not think you're actually providing care, right? Like you might be helping someone across the country where maybe you're trying to help manage their finances. Maybe you're sending money to them. right? Maybe you're trying to help them emotionally navigate things like moving into the retirement era, right? Maybe you're trying to help them with getting food delivered to the house or getting their appointments to their doctors. Like at Grace, we call that, parents or an aging individual who's still independent or interdependent. I think a lot of people think that caregiving means that person is dependent fully or is in decline, in crisis. And that tends to be, for many folks, at a much later stage in life, and this could go on for decades. But even those other types of non-medical care things, whether that's financial, legal, emotional, functional, those are all elements of care. And they can take, on average, a caregiver spending 20 to 25 hours a week on these issues in easy weeks.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing is more cognitive load, more mental things to keep track of, right? For people who maybe already had, as we heard in an earlier panel, diminished capacity already based on what's going on around us. Heather, anything to add on that part?
I would say, I mentioned I do a lot of work with AARP, and the reason they're involved in family caregiving is because they want to support all of those who are helping people age the way that they want to. So they're actually very deep in the research area of this. And they constantly hear from people that they don't identify as caregivers, not just to their employers, but to themselves, because they say, I'm not a caregiver. This is my, and it's not a burden. I think a lot of people who are providing caregiving for aging family members think of the word caregiving associated with a sense of burden. And they say, no, this is my joy. I am her daughter. I am, her sister. This is not a burden. It may be exhausting. I may be super stressed. It may be a massive weight on my own financial health for the short and long term, but I'm happy to be doing this. And that comes in as well in a way that's different from how we think about parenting, right? Like I could say, of course I'm a parent. Of course parenting has pieces that feel burdensome and pieces that I adore doing. And on balance, it's over here. But it is different somehow. And I think Julia really spoke to that. I think the other piece is that our parents don't want us to think of ourselves as their caregiver. Our children, it's not even a question that we're their parent. So it's a very complicated identity, which makes it hard to reach these folks and provide the support that they need.
There are so many layers to it. Let's go tactical for a minute if we could. So Heather, staying with you, what are some tactical things that people need to be thinking about in the era of COVID-19 when it comes to helping or caring for a loved one?
Sure. I will say, I think Julia's entire business is focused on this, so I'll do high level and then pass it over, Julia, to you for some more pieces. I will also lead with saying everybody should just go to aarp.org/caregiving. There is an immense set of all free tools, guides, worksheets, everything you could think of that will help you if you are in the position of caring for an aging family member. Among those are going to be some resources that address tactical issues like how do you address or think about your decision for your parents or your loved one's decision, rather, where they want to age. Is that at home or is it in a communal living or assisted living scenario? What are the special considerations now that we're in a COVID scenario for that? What are some of the legal documents you need? This one, if you do one thing after this session, make sure it's this one. Talk to your aging loved ones. Make sure that they have their power of attorney and their healthcare directive, all of that type of paperwork set up. You don't need an attorney. Literally, the AARP website will have stuff for you there. Some tactical, real conversations, not in a moment of crisis, with your siblings or extended family or that person's spouse, so that everybody's on the same page and understands up front, here are my limitations, here's what I can do or I can't do. And then finally, I'd say one tactical thing people can do is actually carve out a little bit of time to create a plan with your own home partner, whoever that is. Is that a spouse? Is that somebody who is in your family pod because you're both single parents? But I I do a great workshop for companies that has been quite popular lately about how dual career couples can thrive at work and home, saying like, this isn't one person's job to fix. Let's look at least in the systems that you're in and come up with a plan that everybody, both workplaces and both individuals, are bought into. So those are some of the things, like for an individual to bring their own stress level down and set themselves up for longer term, lower level crisis volatility that come to mind. Julia, I'm sure you have tons to add on that or build in.
You have a lot of great topics, that's for sure. I would probably just piggyback off of some of those to go a little deeper on some of them, which is, you know, as you kind of mentioned before, this is an extremely layered emotional topic. So really, I think like the first stage is understanding from a loved one, how do they want to live? What's important to them, right? What gives them joy? What's going to give them joy in the later stages of life, give them purpose, right? And also, how do they want to die? And some of those questions, you know, that can sound morbid. So the way you have that question, you know, that you have that conversation, it has to be one thinking about tact and just what's important to folks. But certainly as that becomes a very real issue, there's actually even more details than legal plans. And so just understanding the spirit of what's behind that, that actually long term, there's a lot of research that shows like families heal so much better and are relieved from some of the elements of grief and guilt long term by actually having that dialogue. And so that's one of the things that we do with Grace, is try to help people open up how to have those types of conversations and how to go through that process of documenting. Because really, you know, a lot of this is no matter where you are in the journey, right? It might be you're talking about a parent and they're turning 65 and figuring out Medicare, Medicare Advantage, right? Maybe they're Medicaid eligible. Or it might be that you're much further down the process and someone needs pretty active care or they're in a nursing home or what have you. Having a plan for, you know, what stage appropriate and understanding what that arc may look like based on what that loved one wants for their life will really create a lot more calm for everyone. And then being able to set up kind of, as you spoke to, like having a care ecosystem, right? So better understanding who is in that ecosystem for you and kind of creating that sense of community, right? Is it siblings who are dividing responsibilities? So for example, in my family, some have done the finances, some have done the day-to-day medical care and they're shuttling people to hospitals and doctor's appointments. You know, I think creating that plan is something that's very helpful. And then having an expert that you can turn to. I think a lot of people don't understand there's a field that's been called geriatric care management. They're actually rebranding it a little bit. It's called aging life care management. But there's a lot of folks that are playing this role that are kind of like, you know, a symphony conductor, right? Of helping people to understand the lay of the land and no matter where you are to getting organized, or some people would say a quarterback, but that can feel like a gendered term. So, you know, it's really about seeing the landscape and helping get things done and knock down those obstacles for families. And that can be costly as an industry. And so at Grace, we want to democratize that in a virtual environment. So, you know, even within the COVID world, and bring that more through employers because it does very much impact employers' bottom line. And, you know, particularly within COVID, on that question of what's most relevant in COVID, the data on isolation and loneliness among seniors right now is so utterly stupendous. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services has now issued new guidance that nursing homes can have visitors, but you know, as you know, not everyone experiences the same things in the way they should. And people are not going outside. They are not seeing their loved ones. So finding other ways to connect, trying to leverage people to be able to connect via Zoom, helping families with that, sending things to people's homes. So like some of our experts have been, you know, sending things weekly, letters, scratchers, like anything that's entertainment, makes someone feel that they were cared for.
Yeah.
Is really helpful when people are isolated. And also being attuned to how medical situations can change. So my last comment is like, so I lost one of the great elders of my family during COVID, and it was not due to COVID. It was actually due to a medical error based on, not being able to go through normal medical processes that we would have, and having a new provider based on some of the limitations of COVID visitation. And so that really is something that families can talk more about, of who is coming in, when is a risk a better choice than something that you might take a different risk, right? So having a medical implantation or whatever that choice is, you might think about differently based on some of the COVID trade-offs right now. But loneliness, that cascades across all medical concerns.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, you touched on so many different things in there. I appreciate the comment about isolation and mental health, and also I appreciate you sharing your story. I'm so sorry to hear that happened in your family, and many families are experiencing a new way of processing loss and handling gathering, and all those things have been affected by this. So we're experiencing change upon grief, or grief upon change, and it can be extra hard. And I think you also really teed up a good point too about mentioning employers. So that's where I want to go next, is what are employers doing to meet this need among their employee populations? Heather, what are you seeing?
I have to say, I'm going to just bring some bright optimism here, because like 15 years ago, I was, leading what's now KinderCare's employer-sponsored childcare division. And every time we went in to sort of sell a company on opening an on-site childcare or backup care or whatever, discount access to the community daycare centers, the only thing that was driving that purchase decision from employers was, I want to retain my new mothers. So first child, new mother, essentially like manager track, sort of director level and above. And I was always like, this is actually not just about them. This benefits everybody. And they were like, yeah, that's nice, but show me the numbers, literally. And that's what drove the entire decision. And now, I mean, even AARP, in their work is very clearly mission driven to support people to age the way they want to age. And they understand that employers these days, when we talk to them, if we want to talk to them about supporting employees who have family caregiving responsibilities, employers want to hear a holistic solution. Employers actually, remarkably, in 15 years, have gone from like this tiny slice of high potential promotion track new moms. And I was like, you cannot have a whole center full of only infant spots. You don't even have the subsidy available for that. Let me run those numbers for you. To this entire holistic view. So last year, I sometimes also do work with companies that are building out or designing products and services in the space. And I did some kind of work last year in market research around a wellness benefit to support caregivers. And the employers actually said, I don't care about what the ROI is. I would buy this at like way high rates. And I would buy it because it fits our culture and it helps us walk the walk.
Wow.
So I'd say employers are ready. That's where they were before the pandemic. Now they're seeing, like what you guys can't see is like a stack of plastic bins right there. So my children don't just wander through, or employers are seeing all of this stuff too, and they're ready to take action. So they're seeing that it affects everybody. They're looking at benefits, but they're also looking beyond it too. A lot of research shows benefits are fabulous and they are very needed. But the use of benefits is associated with whether it's a culture where that's safe to do, right? And those things are actually often determined by two things. One, have you trained your managers on how to support and manage caregivers? And particularly, are you offering remote, flexible work options to everybody, not just caregivers, not just the woman who threatened to quit, and then you're pulling her back in because you're like, oh, I promise you can work from home on Wednesdays, which may have been me 6 years ago. And so manager training, flexibility, and benefits, and then also like things straight out of the comms team that are actually free, right? Like engage, especially your men, to be open to the company or their teams about their own caregiving, whatever shape that takes, because it's a very important indicator that rolls out to all the populations that we're worried about. That's what I'm doing. But Julia, you're like on the front lines, you know, in the benefits world with employers. What do you see here?
Yeah, I mean, I would piggyback on a lot of what you said, though I think I would push employers harder because that's where we are trying to help people parse some of the differences of what help really looks like. But I think you hit on a lot of things that we've been, as a company, rolling up into this concept of like, this is not a benefits topic, exactly as you said. This is about how do you create a caring culture? And what I think COVID has accelerated that has really impacted this is this next era, right? We've talked about corporate social responsibility for a long time, but like that's been, you know, sort of dumbed down in a lot of ways. Like, what does that mean, right? Is that just giving money? And now I think the dialogue is moving towards you have to support your employees, right? It just has been all about corporations for so long. And with what's happening with COVID, now there's this evolving era that HR is really rising to the center of this pillar of like, this is the chief empathy officer of the company. And if you don't demonstrate that, COVID will not last forever. And memories are long like elephants. Like people will be gone the second they can. And so, you know, with that, you really need to look more holistically at the things like flex time and leave, and not maybe just leave once, but like, hey, we got multiple COVID waves. You might need multiple leaves. And those employee resource groups, right? And giving people safe spaces to talk about this, doing that manager training, actually preparing for compliance changes. So, you know, Cory Booker has introduced federal legislation to make caregivers a protected class at work. And that is because retribution has skyrocketed in the last decade. Yep. And so this could literally become the next ADA, okay? And so with that, benefits is one part of it, but exactly as you hit on, Heather, like if you just put a benefit on an HR hub and you just leave it, people won't necessarily use it, right? You actually need to communicate it. You can leverage that. There are guaranteed executives in your executive team who have had personal experiences who can speak to that and bring it out of the shadows, right? Is particularly adult care. People don't want to talk about that. It is hidden at work. And so I think all those things to make it safer are important. And then when it comes to benefits, so I do want to push employers on this one in particular, which is people still think that caregiving means backup care. People still think this problem is about how do I get, you know, someone, a caregiver in their home or get them referred to assisted living. And yeah, the first organizations were, you know, KinderCare, Bright Horizons, Care.com, you know, but now we're moving to an era where, first of all, this goes on for people for 3 to 5 years on average per person, let alone if you have 2 parents. Guess what? It tends to happen in sequence, if not at once. And so how do you actually help people holistically throughout? Because all of that effort that a company has devoted to trying to retain new moms, this is the exact same strategic problem. How do you retain these folks? And how do you think about promoting them? Because the people who are most likely to leave are women, diverse communities, and your most senior staff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a huge one right there, Julia, because you're taking the definition of this and expanding it out bigger beyond just that new mom. And Heather, you even mentioned this. This is a big, big deal. And it blew my mind when you said this could be the next ADA, because that is essentially the level we need for it to get to in order to protect the caregivers in our country and to give the nod that, hey, we do see what you're doing. We got to, again, make the invisible more visible as the years march on. I want to thank you both for your time. We are at the end of our session. We really appreciate all of your insight. That was amazing. And we're going to